The flight of the airplane hummed softly as it sliced through the sky. The cabin was mostly quiet save for the occasional murmur of passengers. In the front of the cabin, near the first-class section, a woman sat alone. Her presence was commanding, but not by force. She simply carried herself in a way that made others take notice, but she didn't seek attention. She didn't need to. The luxurious first-class seat was a symbol of years of hard work, of climbing, of doing whatever it took to get to the top. She leaned back in her seat, the thick plush fabric surrounding her like a cocoon. Her name was Evelyn Carter. At first glance, she looked like any other successful woman in her early 40s, polished, confident, well-dressed. Her black hair was tied back in a sleek ponytail, her eyes sharp yet calm. She had been traveling for business and was eager to finally get some rest before the long day ahead. But she could not relax. Not yet. The flight attendant appeared in her path with a determined stride, her voice already carrying a tension that cut through the air like a knife. "Excuse me, ma'am," she began, her tone curt. "You're going to have to leave first class." Evelyn's brow furrowed for just a moment as she looked up at the young woman, trying to read her face. There was no hint of apology or confusion in the flight attendant's expression, only a practiced coldness. "What do you mean?" Evelyn asked, her voice calm but with a sharp edge of uncertainty creeping in. The flight attendant's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes flicking down to the clipboard she held in her hand, then back to Evelyn. "I've already checked, and you're not on the list for this seat. I'm afraid you'll have to move." Evelyn felt the weight of the words like a sudden shift in the air, a weight she hadn't anticipated. A flash of confusion rippled through her, quickly replaced by anger. She didn't have time for this. She'd worked too hard to be treated like this, too hard to be questioned when she belonged right where she was. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice steady now, although the storm inside her was building. She glanced around, as if hoping to see someone else who might confirm the absurdity of the situation. "I've been seated here since the moment I boarded." The flight attendant, unwavering, took a deep breath and glanced around as though she was making sure no one was watching. "There's been a mistake. You'll have to leave." The words hit Evelyn like a slap to the face. She felt herself sitting up straighter, her spine stiffening, her pulse quickening. It wasn't just the inconvenience, it was the humiliation of it all. How dare she be treated this way? The room seemed to shrink around her as she looked up at the young woman who had just demanded that she leave. Evelyn could hear her heart beating in her chest, could feel the rush of blood in her ears, but she wasn't about to back down. "No," Evelyn said, the word coming out as a single, clipped syllable. The flight attendant blinked in surprise, as if not quite expecting the response. "No," the flight attendant repeated, her voice rising slightly in disbelief. "Excuse me, but you're not on the list." "And I said no," Evelyn interrupted, her voice now cold and firm. The woman had stepped too far. She had crossed a line, and Evelyn wasn't going to let her get away with it. The flight attendant opened her mouth to protest, but Evelyn was already moving. She stood from her seat with deliberate slowness, not rushing, not giving anyone the satisfaction of seeing her flustered. Her movements were smooth, graceful, as though this was all part of her plan. But inside, a storm was raging. How did this happen? Why was she being treated this way? She reached into her bag, her fingers brushing over the edges of her ID, and pulled out her badge, holding it up in front of the flight attendant's face. "I'm the FAA director," Evelyn said, her voice unwavering. "You've just made a mistake." For a moment, the words hung in the air. There was no immediate reaction. The flight attendant's mouth hung open slightly, her eyes wide with disbelief. She looked at the badge, then back at Evelyn, as if trying to process what she had just heard. The silence in the cabin was thick now. It felt as if time had stopped, the low hum of the plane the only sound in the room. Passengers glanced toward them, eyes shifting between the flight attendant and Evelyn, but no one moved. The atmosphere was charged, a strange energy pulsing through the air. Finally, the flight attendant cleared her throat, still standing frozen in front of Evelyn. I don't understand. You're not on the list, and I think we've already established that," Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Now, I suggest you find someone who actually knows what they're doing." A few passengers shifted in their seats, glancing nervously at each other, but no one spoke. No one dared to speak. Evelyn felt a mix of satisfaction and dread in her chest. This wasn't just about the seat, it was about respect, it was about control, and no one, Not even a flight attendant would take that from her. The flight attendant didn't respond at first. She simply stared at Evelyn, her face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and frustration. The seconds felt like minutes as they stood there, neither one moving. Finally, the attendant's eyes flickered toward the other passengers, as if seeking confirmation. Evelyn felt the moment stretch, every second of tension playing out in slow motion. And then, the attendant took a shaky breath, her voice small and uncertain. I'll get the captain." "No need," Evelyn said. "I'm sure he'll recognize me." The flight attendant hesitated for a moment, then nodded, her movements stiff and mechanical. She turned and walked quickly toward the front of the plane, her back straight but her steps uncertain. As the sound of her retreating footsteps faded, the cabin remained silent. Evelyn sat back down in her seat, her hands trembling slightly as she placed her badge back into her bag. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes for just a moment. This wasn't over. Far from it. She had already won. But the real battle was just beginning. The captain's arrival. Evelyn sat in her seat, the quiet hum of the plane surrounding her, her thoughts racing. The moments since the confrontation had passed in a blur, but they felt like hours. A thick knot of frustration, confusion, and something darker gnawed at her. She wasn't just angry, she was hurt. How could anyone, let alone a flight attendant, treat her this way? She had earned her place in this world, fought for it every step of the way, and yet here she was, being questioned like she was some kind of imposter. The seconds stretched into minutes, and Evelyn could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her. She could feel their judgment, their curiosity, but she wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of knowing how much it stung. She straightened her back, smoothing her dress as she stared straight ahead, waiting. It wouldn't be long before the captain arrived. She had worked too hard for too long to be treated like this. The badge she had shown them, the same one that had opened doors for her throughout her career, had done nothing but stir up suspicion. She knew it wasn't the flight attendant's fault. This was bigger than that, bigger than a small misunderstanding. This was a test, one she didn't plan on losing. And then, just as she was starting to settle into the silence of her thoughts, the door to the cockpit opened. The captain stepped into the aisle, tall, graying hair, and the aura of someone who had seen it all. He wasn't young, but he had the presence of a man who commanded respect. The passengers, once again, fell silent as he walked down the aisle, his eyes briefly scanning the cabin before settling on Evelyn. He stopped in front of her, and for a moment there was nothing but stillness. Evelyn's heart raced, but she didn't flinch. She would hold her ground. "I'm Captain Jameson," the man said, his voice deep and authoritative. "I understand there's been some confusion." Evelyn nodded once, her face composed. "Yes, I've been asked to leave my seat. The flight attendant claims I'm not on the list for first class." Jameson raised an eyebrow, clearly trying to piece together the situation. "I see. And you've shown her your badge?" "I have," Evelyn replied evenly, her voice steady. The captain glanced at the flight attendant, who stood just behind him, clearly uncomfortable, but trying to maintain her professionalism. Jameson sighed, rubbing his temples as though this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. "I'm sorry about the misunderstanding," he said, his tone less than sincere, "but I'll need to verify some things first. Please bear with me for a moment." As the captain turned away to speak with the flight attendant, Evelyn's mind raced. What was happening here? Was this really just a misunderstanding, or was something else at play? She glanced at the other passengers. None of them dared to meet her eyes, all too focused on their own activities, pretending not to notice the unfolding drama. Minutes passed, and the tension in the air grew thick, oppressive. Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that there was something beneath the surface here, something more than just a simple mistake. She had worked with pilots, captains, and other high-ranking officials her whole career. She knew how they operated. They didn't make mistakes. Not this kind of mistake. Finally, the captain returned, his expression unreadable. He stood at the front of the aisle, his hands clasped behind his back. "Miss Carter," he began, his voice steady but with a hint of regret. "I've verified your identity, and it turns out you are indeed on the list." The flight attendant made an error. Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she held her tongue. She wasn't about to let this man off the hook. "So I see," she said, her voice like ice. "And what do you intend to do about it?" The captain looked uncomfortable now, as though he had hoped this would end without further confrontation. He glanced at the flight attendant, then back to Evelyn. I'll have her apologize and clear up the situation. You can return to your seat." Evelyn shook her head slowly. "That's not enough." The captain blinked in surprise. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Evelyn said, standing up. Her voice was calm, but the fury simmering beneath it was unmistakable. "You think an apology is going to fix this? You think it's enough to clear up the embarrassment and humiliation I've just been put through? No, I'm not going anywhere until I speak to the person who put me in this position." The captain opened his mouth to protest, but Evelyn cut him off, her eyes fierce now. "I'm not leaving this plane until I speak to someone higher up, someone who understands what it means to respect a person's position and not undermine them based on a mistake." The captain hesitated, clearly weighing his options. "I'm afraid there's no one else here, Ms. Carter. I'm the one in charge of this flight." "I'm not talking about this flight," Evelyn said, her voice low but intense. "I'm talking about your company. I want to speak to someone who can make this right, now." For a moment, there was only silence. The passengers around her shifted uncomfortably, but none of them spoke up. The flight attendant stood at the back, looking uncertain and worried. The captain was caught in a difficult position, but Evelyn wasn't going to back down. He sighed, clearly defeated. "All right, I'll make a call. But I warn you, Miss Carter, this could take time." Evelyn nodded once, her eyes never leaving his. "I have all the time in the world." The minutes passed like hours. Evelyn sat back down in her seat, her hands clasped tightly together, her fingers pressing into her palms with the pressure of her frustration. Her mind was a storm of thoughts, each one darker than the last. She had built her career on trust, on respect, on being the kind of person who was always 2 steps ahead. Yet here she was, stranded on a plane, treated like a second-class citizen, for no reason other than a mistaken error that could have been cleared up in minutes, but was being drawn out in front of everyone. The humiliation was unbearable. She had seen enough of the world to know when something wasn't right, and this wasn't right. There was more to it than a simple oversight. Evelyn knew it. She could feel it in her bones. The flight attendant stood at the back of the cabin, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her uniform. She couldn't meet Evelyn's eyes, not now, not after everything that had happened. She looked embarrassed, but Evelyn wasn't about to let that be enough. It wasn't just about the flight attendant. It wasn't just about a mistake. It was about the system, the people in power, the ones who thought they could just push others aside without consequence. Her eyes flicked to the captain, who was now standing at the front of the plane, speaking quietly into his phone. He wasn't speaking in English. His voice was low, urgent, as if he was trying to avoid being overheard. Evelyn leaned forward slightly in her seat, straining to catch the words. ... "Yes, I understand. I'm not sure what to say, sir. ... She's insisting." Evelyn could hear the hesitation in his voice, and it only confirmed what she had already suspected. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. Something about her presence had rattled him, rattled the whole plane. She wasn't just another passenger. To them, she was an anomaly, a problem that needed to be dealt with. The captain's voice dropped lower as he continued his conversation, but Evelyn had heard enough. Her suspicion had been confirmed. She was being dismissed. She wasn't just being asked to move from first class. She was being treated like an obstacle that needed to be removed. She stood up again, the movement deliberate, precise. The room seemed to hold its breath as the passengers watched her, their eyes wide, unsure of what would happen next. Even the flight attendants seemed to hold her breath. Evelyn moved to the front of the plane, her heels clicking sharply against the floor, cutting through the silence like a knife. "Captain," she said, her voice calm but cutting through the tension in the air. "I'm done waiting." The captain looked up, startled by her sudden movement. He had been so focused on his phone call that he hadn't expected her to approach him. His face paled slightly when he saw the determination in her eyes. "Miss Carter," he began, his voice softer now, but still holding a hint of authority. "I'm afraid there's nothing more I can do right now. I'm waiting for higher authorization." Evelyn didn't hesitate. "Then, I'll make the call myself." Without waiting for his response, she pulled out her own phone and dialed the number that had been etched into her memory for years. It was a direct line to her office, her assistant, and more importantly, it was a line that would get her the answers she needed. She pressed the phone to her ear, listening to the ringing. The captain's eyes widened as he watched her, his face filled with surprise and disbelief. He took a step toward her, his hand almost instinctively reaching out, but he stopped himself. The passengers watched in silence, their eyes flicking back and forth between Evelyn and the captain, unsure of what was unfolding before them. Ms. Carter, the captain said, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. Please, let me handle this. Evelyn didn't even look at him. She was too focused on the phone call. The line clicked, and then there was the familiar voice of her assistant. Miss Carter, what's the matter? Is everything all right? Evelyn's voice was low, but there was no mistaking the steel in it. I'm on a flight right now. There's been an issue with my seating, and I need to speak with someone immediately. Get me the CEO of this airline. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Of course, Miss Carter, I'll put you through right now. Evelyn didn't flinch. She had worked too hard to be put in this position. No one was going to make her feel small. Not now, not ever. She could hear the faint click of a transfer, and then the voice on the other end changed. It was calm, authoritative, but with a hint of confusion. Miss Carter, this is Richard Harris, CEO of Vantage Airlines. I understand there's a situation on one of our flights. What can I do for you? Evelyn's grip tightened around the phone. She could hear the hum of the airplane around her, but it was distant now, a background noise to the conversation that was unfolding. This wasn't about just getting back to her seat. This wasn't about a mistake. This was about power. On Flight 463, Evelyn began, her voice even but tinged with authority. I've been asked to leave my first-class seat by your staff. I've shown my badge, and yet here I am, standing in front of you, waiting for some kind of resolution. I've had enough. I want this situation handled, now. There was a silence on the other end, followed by the sound of papers shuffling. She could tell Harris was looking up information. He was probably trying to figure out who this woman was, what kind of power she had, what kind of connections she was wielding. Ms. Carter, Harris said finally, his tone shifting slightly. I had no idea. This should not have happened. I'll personally make sure you're taken care of when you land. Take care of me, Evelyn repeated, a laugh escaping her lips, though there was no humor in it. No, you don't understand. I want this handled now. This is bigger than just a seat. You're wasting my time, and I'm done waiting. You'll make sure the staff understands that, and you'll ensure no one else is treated like this. She could hear him nodding on the other end. Of course, Ms. Carter, you have my word. I'll handle this personally. No, Evelyn said, her voice sharp now. You won't handle it. I will. And I'll make sure everyone knows how this went down. You will fix this, or I will. The line went silent for a moment, and then Harris spoke, his voice much quieter now. Understood. Evelyn ended the call and turned back to the captain. I expect a full apology when we land. And not just from you, from the entire airline. She didn't wait for his response. With one final glance at the captain, she turned and walked back to her seat, her head held high, her eyes scanning the room as she passed by the other passengers. They were watching her now, and she knew it. It didn't matter. She had made her move. The game was now in her hands. The confrontation, the plane was nearing its destination, and yet Evelyn's heart still pounded in her chest. The call to the CEO had done little to ease the fire that was burning inside her. She sat in her seat, staring out of the window, watching the clouds below. The world outside seemed distant, almost irrelevant compared to the storm she had just unleashed within the confines of this airplane. Her mind raced, replaying every detail of the confrontation. She had known something wasn't right from the start, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized that this wasn't just about the flight, about the seat, or even the mistaken identity. This was a power play, an act of defiance against someone who thought they could get away with undermining her. And now, the airline's CEO had promised to make it right. But Evelyn wasn't waiting for them to fix things. She wasn't about to let this fade into a forgotten incident. She would make sure it was a lesson for everyone involved. Flight attendants, captains, CEOs, whoever dared to undermine someone like her. The plane jolted slightly as it began its descent. The seatbelt sign lit up, and the passengers around her began to shift uncomfortably, strapping themselves in. Evelyn did the same, but her mind remained far away from the routine task of preparing for landing. She glanced over at the flight attendant, who was standing at the back of the cabin, her arms crossed tightly in front of her. The woman's face was a mix of confusion, embarrassment, and fear. Evelyn met her gaze, holding it for a moment longer than necessary. The flight attendant quickly looked away, her body stiffening as though she wanted to disappear. Evelyn couldn't help but feel a wave of satisfaction. The attendant had made a mistake, but the larger picture was still far from resolved. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. The sound of the captain's voice crackled through the overhead speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened and your trays are stowed. We'll be on the ground in just a few minutes." The routine announcement did little to settle Evelyn's nerves. She had played the game by the rules, made the calls, but she still felt the sting of being humiliated in front of everyone. It wasn't just about the seat anymore. It was about respect, about dignity, and she would get it, one way or another. The plane touched down gently, the wheels making contact with the tarmac with a slight shudder. The cabin buzzed with the usual sounds of arrival seatbelts unbuckling, the faint hum of the engines slowing down. Evelyn stayed in her seat, her hands resting on the armrests, her body tense. She wasn't ready to move, not yet. She was waiting for something, waiting for the moment when everything would change. The captain came down the aisle shortly, after the plane had fully stopped, his steps measured but deliberate. Evelyn turned to face him, her eyes sharp, her posture rigid. He stopped a few feet away from her, his hands clasped in front of him, but there was no mistaking the unease in his stance. "Miss Carter," he began, his voice quieter now, "I wanted to personally apologize for the confusion earlier. It was never our intention to cause you any distress." Evelyn didn't respond immediately. She let his words hang in the air, allowing the silence to stretch, the weight of his apology sinking in. "Do you understand the gravity of this situation?" she finally asked, her voice calm but carrying an edge. "This wasn't just about a seat, Captain. This wasn't just about some small misunderstanding. You humiliated me in front of everyone here, and for what?" The captain shifted uneasily. I understand, Ms. Carter, and once again, I am deeply sorry, but I had no idea who you were at first, and that's why I reacted the way I did." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "You didn't know who I was. Do you think that matters? Do you think that justifies treating me like an inconvenience?" The captain's face reddened, and Evelyn could see the flicker of discomfort in his eyes. "No, Ms. Carter, it doesn't justify it. But we were just following procedure." "We don't give me that," Evelyn snapped. "Following procedure? This was never about procedure. This was about power. Your staff thought they could intimidate me, make me feel small because they didn't know who I was. And now, you're standing here, acting like an apology will make everything go away. Well, it won't." She paused, her words hanging in the air like a challenge. "You want to make it right, then make it public. Tell everyone on this flight what happened. Tell them why I was treated this way. And don't just apologize. Do something about it." The captain opened his mouth to speak, but Evelyn wasn't done. She stood up, her eyes locked on his. "And you're going to start by addressing the staff. You're going to tell them that no one should ever treat a passenger this way, no matter who they are. This isn't over, Captain, not by a long shot." The tension between them thickened, but the captain didn't argue. He simply nodded. "Understood, Miss Carter. I will handle it. I'll make sure the staff is informed. I'll take care of everything." "Good," Evelyn said, her voice finally softening. She gave him one last, cold look before turning to leave. "I'll expect results." As she made her way down the aisle, she felt the weight of the moment settle into her chest. The cabin had grown quieter, the energy in the air shifting. Passengers glanced at her, their faces a mix of curiosity and respect. Evelyn knew they were watching. They had seen what had happened, and they were waiting to see what would happen next. She didn't look back. She wasn't concerned with their opinions. She was concerned with what came next. The power she had just taken back was only the beginning. It wasn't just about the apology anymore. It was about making sure no one else was ever put in the position she had been. It was about showing that no one, no matter how powerful they were, could walk all over her. The doors opened, and Evelyn stepped off the plane, her feet firm on the ground. But as she walked through the terminal, she knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The aftermath. The airport terminal buzzed with activity as Evelyn moved through the crowd, her footsteps steady, her gaze unwavering. The weight of what had happened still clung to her, but she didn't let it show. She had already won the first battle, but the war was far from over. The apology from the captain was just a small piece of the puzzle. The real work, the real reckoning, was yet to come. Her phone buzzed in her hand, the screen lighting up with an incoming call. The name on the display made her pause for a split second, her eyes narrowing. It was Richard Harris, the CEO of Vantage Airlines. She answered immediately, her voice calm but firm. "Miss Carter," Harris began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had been under pressure. "I wanted to reach out to personally apologize for the events that transpired on Flight 463. I've spoken to the captain, and we've taken steps to address the issue." Evelyn's grip on the phone tightened, her fingers brushing against the edges of the screen as she slowed her pace. "What steps?" she asked, her voice cold. "What exactly have you done to address this?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, as if Harris was trying to find the right words. "I've instructed the staff to review their procedures, to ensure something like this never happens again. I've also informed our legal team to conduct a full investigation into the matter. I understand this wasn't handled properly." Evelyn could hear the sincerity in his voice, but it wasn't enough. Not by a long shot. "An apology isn't enough, Mr. Harris," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I need more than that. I need real action, public accountability. I assure you, Miss Carter, we will do everything in our power to make this right." Harris responded quickly. "We value our customers, and your experience does not reflect the standards we uphold. I'll ensure that appropriate measures are taken." Evelyn stopped walking, her eyes scanning the bustling terminal around her. People moved in every direction, but she felt completely removed from it all, as if she was in a different world entirely. She had done everything she could to make her voice heard, but it seemed like the apology was just another way to placate her. The more Harris spoke, the more she realized how much she had underestimated the depth of this issue. "It's not just about this flight," Evelyn said, her voice low but firm. "It's about respect. You humiliated me in front of those passengers. And not just me, every person who was on that plane witnessed what happened. They saw how I was treated. That kind of treatment doesn't go away with a few apologies." Harris hesitated. "What are you asking for, Ms. Carter?" "I'm asking for a public statement," Evelyn replied, her mind already forming the next steps. "I want you to address what happened and make it clear that no one will ever face this kind of treatment again. I want the world to know how you failed me and how you plan to fix it." She could feel her pulse quickening, the adrenaline kicking in as she realized how much power she held in this moment. The airline had made a mistake. They had disrespected her, underestimated her, and now they were going to pay the price for it. Harris was quiet for a long moment. Evelyn didn't say anything, letting the silence stretch between them. Finally, he spoke again, his voice softer, now almost resigned. "I'll make the statement, Miss Carter. I'll ensure it's broadcasted on every platform we have. You have my word." "That's a start," Evelyn said, a small hint of satisfaction creeping into her voice. "But it's not enough yet. I'll be expecting the full details of your investigation, and I expect it to be thorough. I want you to send me a report on the changes you plan to implement, what you're going to do to make sure this never happens again." "I understand," Harris replied. "We'll do everything we can." Evelyn ended the call with a sharp click and slipped her phone back into her bag. As she did, she felt the weight of the moment settle into her chest. It wasn't over yet, not by a long shot, but it was a victory. A small one, but a victory nonetheless. She walked through the terminal, her mind spinning with the possibilities. The public statement was just the beginning. The real change would come when she made sure the airline followed through on their promises, and when she held them accountable, when she made sure the world saw just how far they had fallen. As she exited the terminal, a wave of exhaustion washed over her. It had been a long, difficult journey to this point, but she wasn't done yet. There was still work to be done. The fight wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been treated unfairly, everyone who had ever been made to feel small or insignificant by the system. She was standing up for them now, whether they realized it or not. Her phone buzzed again, breaking her from her thoughts. This time, it was an email notification. She opened it immediately, her eyes scanning the message. It was from her legal team, confirming that they had already started working on a case against Vantage Airlines for the mistreatment she had endured. They had gathered evidence from the flight and were preparing to take legal action if necessary. Evelyn smiled slightly to herself. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been brushed aside by those in power. And no matter how long it took, no matter how much it cost, she would keep fighting until the truth was known. As she stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for her office, her mind raced with the possibilities. She could already see the headlines, the public statement from the airline, the apology from the CEO, the legal action she had set into motion. She had taken control of the situation. She had made her stand, and now the world would see just how far she was willing to go to get justice. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime, and as it ascended, Evelyn leaned back against the wall, her eyes closed for a moment. She had fought for this moment, and she would continue to fight for the future, for the change that was long overdue. The reckoning. Evelyn stepped into her office, the familiar scent of polished wood and expensive leather filling her senses. The room, her sanctuary, had always been a place of calm in the midst of chaos, but today it felt different. Today, she wasn't just sitting behind a desk, she was the one in control. She had fought for this moment. She had fought to take back what was hers, and now the fight was over, or at least the first round was. She sat down, her eyes glancing over the city skyline through her floor 2 ceiling windows. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the buildings, but inside, her thoughts were sharp and cold. The victory wasn't as sweet as she had imagined. It never was. She had done what needed to be done, but the aftermath of it all still lingered in her mind. The apologies, the statements, the investigation. It wasn't enough. She knew that. Her phone buzzed on the desk, breaking her thoughts. It was an email from Richard Harris, the CEO of Vantage Airlines. He had followed through on his promise. The public statement was live. The airline had apologized, not just to her, but to all the passengers on Flight 463. They had pledged to review their procedures and put in place stricter policies to prevent any further incidents. Evelyn had forced their hand, and now they were playing by her rules. She opened the email, reading through the carefully crafted words. It was a well-written apology, filled with remorse and promises to change. But it didn't change the fact that the apology had come too late. The damage had already been done. The truth had already come to light. She couldn't help but smile a little. It wasn't about the apology. It wasn't about what they said. It was about what they would do next. And Evelyn had made sure that what came next would be more than just words. Her phone rang again, this time with a name she didn't expect. It was her lawyer. Evelyn picked up immediately, her heart picking up speed. Ms. Carter, her lawyer's voice came through, calm and measured, but there was an edge of urgency in it. We've just received the official report from the airline's internal investigation. I think you're going to want to hear this. Evelyn's pulse quickened. What does it say? They've found some serious discrepancies in their procedures, the lawyer said. It turns out this wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. There were lapses in their training, in their systems, and most importantly, in their oversight. They failed to follow protocol, and it goes beyond just your incident. We're talking about systemic issues that could affect hundreds, if not thousands, of passengers. Evelyn's mind raced. This was what she had been waiting for. The real proof. The smoking gun. She wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Send me the report, Evelyn said, her voice steady now, and make sure we're ready. This isn't over. After the call ended, Evelyn sat back in her chair, staring at the email on her phone screen. The airline had tried to contain the situation, but it was bigger than they realized. They had no idea what kind of fight they had just stepped into, and Evelyn wasn't going to let them forget it. The press conference days later, Evelyn stood before a sea of reporters, the bright lights of the cameras trained on her. The room was packed with journalists from every major news outlet, all eager to hear her side of the story. She had waited for this moment, planned for it, made sure the narrative was in her hands. The airline's apology had been the first step, but this was the moment that would solidify her victory. She stepped up to the podium, the weight of the moment settling into her bones. She had faced worse. She had fought harder battles, but this was different. This was personal. Ladies and gentlemen, Evelyn began, her voice firm and clear. I stand before you today not just as a passenger on Flight 463, but as a person who has been wronged, not by mistake, but by a system that failed to protect me and countless others. The reporters leaned forward, their pens poised, ready to capture every word. Evelyn continued, each word carefully chosen, each sentence a deliberate strike. Vantage Airlines has issued an apology, yes, but an apology does not undo the harm done. An apology does not erase the humiliation, the disrespect, and the systemic failures that led to this moment. It does not bring back the trust that was broken. She paused, letting her words sink in. The room was silent. She could feel the weight of the eyes on her, waiting for the next revelation. "I have received the results of their internal investigation," Evelyn said, her voice rising with conviction. "And let me be clear, what they found is not just an isolated incident. This is a pattern of behavior that affects every passenger who flies with them. This is not just about me. This is about accountability. This is about ensuring that no one else ever faces what I faced on that flight." The reporters exchanged glances, murmuring among themselves. Evelyn could hear the click of cameras, the scribbling of notes. She knew the story was already spreading, but she wasn't done. "Today, I'm not here to ask for an apology. I'm here to demand change," she said, her gaze sweeping across the room, making sure every single person was paying attention. "I'm here to make sure that this company, and every company like it, understands that they cannot treat people as if they are disposable. No one should ever have to go through what I went through, and I will not stop until this is made right." The fallout. The press conference was a turning point. The media buzzed with the news, and the story spread like wildfire. Headlines ran across every major news outlet, social media exploded with comments, and the hashtag Justice for Carter trended for days. Evelyn had become the face of a movement, a symbol of standing up against corporate negligence and mistreatment. The CEO of Vantage Airlines had no choice but to act. The public outcry was overwhelming. The airline issued another statement, this one promising immediate reforms to their internal policies. They had no choice but to comply. But Evelyn knew that fight was far from over. She had made sure that this wasn't just a fleeting moment. She had ensured that the conversation about corporate responsibility, about accountability, would continue long after the dust settled. She had taken something broken, something that could have been swept under the rug, and turned it into a lesson, for herself, for everyone. And when the final report came in confirming that the airline had indeed failed in multiple areas of operation, Evelyn knew she had won. They had been forced to change. They had been forced to listen, and the industry would be watching closely, waiting to see what would happen next. She leaned back in her chair that evening, the weight of everything sinking in. The battle had been hard, and the scars would remain. But in the end, it was worth it. She had fought for herself, for justice, and for the future. Evelyn Carter had become more than just a passenger. She had become a force to be reckoned with, and as she looked out of her office window, watching the city below, she knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. The end